Hello, I'm Peter Ayres, and you're listening to Stages, the podcast that converses
World
with
War
creatives
II gave us Waiting for Godot and Oklahoma.
Without the arts, we are diminished.
We had the kind of creative freedom.
I was on television as a child, and then I was in Cotty's happy hour.
She leaned across to me and she said, one day, you'll be doing that.
Mind-boggling. They were even lined with purple leather.
I went to the ABC and auditioned.
I was so fit at the end of that, you could have entered me in the Melbourne Cup.
I still firmly believe that great work can be made in small places.
If nobody's going to respect your talent, you've got to respect it.
I hope I've been entertaining, that's all.
Well, that's very kind of you, Peter. But you are a friend.
And as are you.
Yeah, it's a date.
It's a date.
Hello, I'm Peter Ayres. Welcome back to part 3 of the Stages conversation with Peter Cousens. In this finale episode, we explore Peter's pursuits following a triumphant series of turns on musical theatre stages. His passion and belief in the musical as an essential theatrical form to be respected and celebrated led him to the birth of Kookaburra, a company providing Australian creatives and performers an opportunity to construct great works in the canon and build new repertoire. He expands further on the joys and challenges of life as a creative force in this candid episode of the Stages podcast.
What do you think Cameron could possibly have been warning you about?
I think that just the difficulties of doing what he does, and he recognised too. And he'd got out of Australia by then in terms of being significantly involved. And he'd created a culture and a way of doing things, which part of what we were doing ended up sort of trying to do that in a smaller scale, which didn't kind of work. But also he read the signs of a changing audience, a changing tastes, changing things that were happening in Australia. Obviously, Australia wasn't viable for him anymore, and there were reasons for that at the time. I don't know what they were, but he said that to me 2 years before, and he sort of said it to me again, that things had changed, the culture had changed, that those days were gone in a way, and what I was creating just may not do what you think it's going to do, which is. And what I was trying to do was fill the vacuum between what he did and small, fringy, co-op stuff that was, happening, and community stuff. Fill the and be able to do musicals at a scale that have production values and people got paid, but we're not on that scale. But doing musicals that were not in his style, which was reproductions of originals. What I wanted to do was have reinterpretations of classic stuff and Australian stuff, and or initial interpretations of Australian musicals, etc. That was the plan. So everything was about the director coming with their own creative concept for each show, and not get caught up in doing reproductions of already created stuff. So designers, directors, lighting designers, costume designers, actors weren't working to a blueprint. That was the plan, because what had happened in Australian musical theatre was that everything was about a blueprint. Everything was about what was being done before, and we were just importing this kind of stuff. And I was certainly. And I think Showboat did it to me. I'd gone to Canada to Toronto to learn the role with the Canadian cast, and it was really acting by numbers. And I was just, because in many ways I was going to slot in like a jigsaw piece into the Australian company, and I was really disheartened. And it was probably the worst theatre experience of my life doing that show. As much as I loved all the beautiful people in it, it was just wasn't the thing.
You hear that from so many artists who go into those franchise productions. There is no opportunity to be creative. You are effectively a warm prop who has to replicate the original performances.
Yeah, and in many ways, I had been lucky because I'd worked with directors in some of those musicals who made you feel as though it was all your own work. So I hadn't really quite caught that. Even doing the Phantom, which was at times, very much you've got to be in that position because that's where the lights are and that's where that's happening and this is what happens to you then and that's what she does and that's what happens then. So there was that. But I kind of bought into it all until I got to that Showbird situation. There was something about it that I kind of cracked because I'd really thrived on it before and I love the long runs and I know actors sometimes hate it, but I thrived on it. I loved the sort of minutiae of second by second, and it's like playing in a sport really where your timing gets so precise that you seem to have so much time to do anything. The way you strike a bat on a ball, I seem to have found time to move from idea to note to all this kind of stuff used to go through my head that I loved experimenting with and playing with on stage, and that comes with hyper familiarity. But it does release you to do stuff in the millisecond that is thrilling. I don't know if it's necessarily thrilling for the audience, but it was certainly thrilling for me. I hoped it was thrilling for the audience at times. But that was my sort of headspace then. I learned a lot, and on reflection, I learned a lot of things that I don't necessarily believe anymore. But at the time, I was very committed to a whole lot of stuff, which included this idea of trying to break free from the blueprinted musical. I didn't see that. I expect regathering of Australian creative forces didn't have to happen in a fringe or co-op world. That I believed that we could find an audience who'd trust these new creations.
Well, Kookaburra commenced with lofty ambition and fabulous intentions. Their goal was to be a world-leading producer, developer, and advocate of musical theatre, and to affirm musical theatre's central role in the cultural and social life of Australia. It's now about 12 years since the company ceased operation. Are you able to look back now with perspective and sort of recognise what perhaps went wrong?
Yes, and I'm pretty clear about what didn't happen and what could have happened and what should have happened. I've certainly reflected on even lofty statements like that. I sort of still believe could be true. I sort of aligned that whole concept with the nature of sport, and there is no reason why, as it turned out, I discovered that next to sport, there are vast members of the population who saw going to musicals was their second choice of how to spend their leisure dollar. So after a bit of research, I discovered things like that, which I found kind of interesting. But it had to be at a certain level, and often what I discovered it was, one night out a year to see a mega musical. That was sort of.
Well, there was no one championing the form really, except community theatres and the big commercial theatres. There was sort of nothing in between. Even the subsidised companies, in the time of Richard Ware and Wayne Harrison, Sydney Theatre Company, who had musicals as part of their repertoire, that all seemed to disappear as well. Yeah, yes, it was. I think that's probably maybe what Cameron was warning me about. But that vacuum and. I certainly engaged with all the community theatres too in Sydney, and to try and to gain their support really. But in retrospect, maybe they didn't want to be that supportive because they were putting on musicals of a pretty good standard themselves, with large enough
after budgets and cleverly done to be able to hold the audiences, in those areas. And if they weren't supportive, and understandably they probably weren't, because some of the productions we were doing, they would probably happily do, like Pippin and Little Women and Company, and But on reflection, the plan was that the company would land whole, like a spaceship, into the theatre landscape, into the musical theatre landscape, and say, "Here we are, aren't we great? This is something you all should embrace, and let's get on with it, because we're filling this vacuum." And that was sort of the message.
Did you go too big too soon, do you think? That were, those first productions, Pippin, Company, obviously had enormous budgets. You were playing in sort of mainstream theatres. Would it have been better to have built the company up?
To a certain extent, yes. That seems to be the usual way, isn't it? That the companies start off in sort of small, low rent spaces and build reputations and acquire support and an audience over time. And 4 or 5 years later, does anything happen? What is that? The history of the Griffin Theatre Company? Is it the history of Belvoir? It's certainly the history of Belvoir coming out of Nimrod. Well, the Griffin has remained basically the same size it was 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I really wasn't encouraged by those sorts of stories of the basement theatre company, that the old Fitzroy, those sort of things. I expect I had greater ambitions, because I believe because musical theatre is only driven by the fact that it's commercial. Its nature is, and that's why people get frustrated with it from an artistic point of view, to a certain extent, because it is driven by this need to be accessible and to be liked, to be popular. That is by definition really what musical theatre has been. That being the case, I didn't see how that style of growth was going to be suited. I preferred the idea of landing wholly formed, with some of the best actors, best performers, best musicians, best directors in the country doing what they do. Now, the biggest mistake was exactly what you said, was starting too big. and instead of asking those creative people to work for next to smaller amounts of money, working in different sorts of spaces, and not having that huge battle with places like the Sydney Theatre down at the Sydney Theatre Company or the Theatre Royal. I mean, it was like hell on earth, just the kind of...
Because that's where Pippin premiered, and then your company played Theatre Royal, and then you Seymour Centre.
And we were supposed to... We were going to open down at the Sydney Theatre as well. We had lots of conversations with Rob Brookman and the theatre there. And just all those costs sort of didn't help. But putting all that's not really what I mean. Is when I first created the model, and I spent ages with this wonderful guy from the Australia Council, and we worked for about 8 or 9 months with a laptop. And he was a financial guy, and we created models for musicals that were budgeted around about $400,000 for the whole thing. By the time we got to opening night of Pippin, it was over $1 million. So I'd sort of betrayed the model very early on, and the money we lost on Pippin was the same amount we ended up without at the end after 2.5 years. So we actually never recovered and we never found the audience that we thought was there, we believed was there, and so in retrospect, if only we had remained on that financial model, and we went to different spaces. There was the where we were, the Australia Theatre in across the road from Mark Foy's, the Downing Centre was a wonderful space which had been a theatre, and we could have slapped up some tiered seating and created a little space on a par with some of those little theatres in New York, and created some interesting stuff in there. But there were problems with all of that, those sorts of ideas, and they weren't part of the model. The model was finding mainstream spaces to sort of make sense of the corporate support we had, which was huge. $2.5 million was raised, and so it felt like we needed to match that. But in retrospect, again, those conversations could have been had with those people, and I don't think they would have withdrawn their support. Such was their heartfelt desire for success. So these things, I think I wasn't inclusive. I felt on the back foot. I felt I got to the stage very early on that I was sort of defending what I was doing from people, and that gave me it made me a bit paranoid and a bit. I started to put the walls up. Instead of what I would do now was be utterly inclusive and bring people in and gain their understanding of what was going on, and get them included in some decision making and some ideas and thoughts, and have them very much, and get the industry to own it in some form or other. That was a mistake. I think it was very much it felt, I'm sure to the outside, that it was somehow a closed shop, and even though we had sort of events and things to try and make that work, that somehow I missed a memo somewhere along the line which said, ask the right people to come through the door and talk to them about what they think. But another part of me was saying, well, most of these ideas are usually driven by one person's drive, enthusiasm, and chutzpah, and I expect maybe I believe my own publicity, and kind of went down that track.
If there was anyone that was going to hopefully make it work, it was somebody like you that had the profile and considerable runs on the board as far as musical theatre goes. I mean, even, in the beginning, having your name attached to the company name, Peter Cousens Kookaburra. John Ballard done it with the Shakespeare Company. It seemed like the right thing to do. But I guess there's an element of the community also who see that as arrogance or like to knock it. We get into that tall poppy syndrome, sort of you're getting a bit above your boots, Cousens. So people would come in with the boot, which they did, sadly. But it needn't have gone that way.
No. And I don't know whether that's, I mean, I think that's sure there would have been an element of that. And certainly the John Bell model was very clear in our heads in terms of that kind of branding, and that was certainly our marketing. People thought all that was the way to go initially, and then it then again became something that had to be defended, and so that didn't help. But also it was the beginning of social media, and social media, particularly on things like AussieTheatre.com at the time, where everyone was anonymous, that didn't help. It was a difficult time, but again, that isn't. I don't think that's all peripheral, really, to I think the one. And if I want to be arrogant, I expect I shouldn't have been the artistic director, and it wasn't my choice really to do that. I didn't want to actually lead the company in that way. I wanted to, if I was going to lead the company, I wanted to lead it as a performer, because that's where my skills were. My skills weren't in doing this. And if I'd handed it over to, or I would have handed it over to someone like Gail, but she was going through her own stuff at that time, and so, or a Stuart Maunder, or and just being a performer, and which is where I was sort of heading to with Floyd Collins. I was wanting to sort of get out of that, but those plans didn't kind of work out that way. Everything should have been smaller. You're quite right. Everything should have. If we do it now, where everyone is used to working for nothing, they would have. We could have created with $2.5 million behind us a little theatre company that paid enough, that paid equity rates and held everything down and had some money in the bank constantly, instead of sort of blowing it all in the setup and the first production, which was really, when you think about it, and a bit, So that would be my feeling, that you're right, too big, too fast.
Maybe some of the repertoire was a bit obtuse to the audience that you were hoping to garner.
Yeah. And look, the choice was to try and to start off with an Australian musical. Gary Young was very keen for us to do that musical about
Sideshow Alley.
Carnival. Sideshow Alley, yeah. And maybe that would have been an interesting way to go. Just go bang with some Australian stuff. But I think you'd have to do it at a small scale and not spend the money, and find a commercial way to do it. And that's what I think. If I had my time over, I'd find some space that wasn't in any way like the kind of spaces that costs so much just to turn on the air conditioning. I'd be asking actors and performers to work for minimum, but because they're all used to it now, it's all seen as opportunity as against livelihood, and I was trying to provide livelihood, and it's a different thing.
Yes, that's the thing, isn't it? Competition is so fierce amongst performers that it's just the opportunity to do it, to be hopefully seen in a showcase. So sometimes they put opportunity before livelihood.
Yeah, and I think that's been the problem for, I think, actors and musical theatre people for ages in Australia. I remember reading an article that Carol Burns wrote before she died about how during the 70s they'd worked so hard to get the public to appreciate and understand that actors were a profession, and they had a profession, and they were professionally paid, and they should be professionally paid. And she lamented this whole move towards the opportunity over livelihood, and that's come with, of course, the overwhelming amount of people who are coming out of drama schools, and I'm just about to start a diploma myself, teaching and creating a whole new opportunity for kids to learn about being an artist. So we are overwhelmed by people searching for jobs and not enough opportunities. So COVID maybe wash a bit of that away. Who knows? But it's washed away a lot of producers and things. So I think what I'm trying to do now is create a situation where we can teach young people how to be entrepreneurial and independent as artists, and use the technology, use the opportunities to be seen around the world in small niches, but enough. That's bigger than Australia, but enough to kind of sustain your career in your calling. And let's face it, a sustained career is not a full-time performing gig. It's probably 20 or maybe 30% of your time. The rest of it is finding ways to sustain it. And it's either working in a pub, it's either teaching, it's either doing, whatever it is. But it still doesn't delegitimize the career. It is still the career, even though it might be being sustained by a whole lot of other stuff.
Finding ways to support your habit.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that is, we just have to recognize and buy into the fact that is the career for most. So, and I had 12 years of doing nothing other than performing. I didn't have to do anything. In fact, 20 years. Extremely lucky. And there were a few, some others who had that experience themselves. But even so, in between some of those times, I was, doing peripheral stuff to help sustain that career. So Kookaburra, in many ways, in my kind of journey was trying to find ways to give livelihood to that. The mistake was made was to just try too hard to make it a good livelihood for people, instead of just being totally strict about how all that worked, and also just not being responsible, finding a better leader, finding a better a business, a proper leader of a producer who could actually had those skills. I didn't have those skills.
How did you seduce Stephen Sondheim to Sydney?
I wrote to him and told him about the company. Said he hadn't been out here for 35 years, and Amy McGrath, who had brought him out here back in the Seymour Centre back in sort of 1978, was also
a musical theatre conference, wasn't it? With
yeah.
Hal came out, and Alan J. Lerner,
and a couple of others came out, and Amy had been sort of responsible for a lot of that. I think I said I was doing company. He and I think we had corresponded, as I tended to do. I mean, I'd corresponded with Hal for years, even before I met him. And doing a fan, I'd corresponded with Trevor Nunn and with and Richard Harris, obviously, and others over the years. And Stephen had been someone. And Michael Feinstein's another one. So he just came back and said, yeah, but we got Qantas on board to pay for 2 first-class tickets, and it was one of those things that didn't come without a cost. And one would say, was the cost worth it? Well, as it turned out, no, it wasn't worth it, because what happened was it corrupted, I expect, the whole relationship between performer and composer, to the point where performers, having met the composer and obviously had a good time, felt they then had every right to loyally inform him if the show wasn't, in their opinion, being cared for in a way which he would like.
We're talking about the incident, of course.
Where we're talking about the cease and desist that was issued to the company the night after those emails were sent to him, or that email signed by all the cast, I think, except for 1 or 2, to him, to say that the production had been butchered. If I had ceased and desist, I mean, jobs were gone, and I presume I would have had to pay the cast out, I expect, I don't know, but they would have lost that gig, and God knows what would happen. But instead, I was asked to apologise to the world in the national newspapers. And I'm not kidding, to the world, like every composer and musician and lyricist in the world. Such was the extraordinary response.
Just to give the background to the listener, company was playing, and one of the actors was ill one night, and so you made the producer's decision, the boss decision, to just cut a character and a musical number. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, and I sent the musical director and the director in. I was in Melbourne actually, seeing the another production down there, and I got the phone call at sort of 6 or so, and so I got the director and musical director to go in, and they happily rehearsed a way of keeping it open, because we had 500 or 600 at the door, and at the Theatre Royal, and there was no way we could afford to close down, given our desire to keep the doors open and some money running in and being able to pay for things. So this wasn't an unusual act for shows. We've done it in many shows that I've been in, where things happen, like people get sick halfway through, so their song has to be cut or things have to be rearranged. Some people get sick very close to the opening thing, and if there's no understudies, well, you've got to shore it up and make it up as you go along, and see what you can do to keep the show open. That is sort of a producer's role, and also it keeps the royalties running in for the composer. But in this case, there was, a loaded gun that had come from the cast for some odd reason. Well, I probably do know the reason, but I won't go into that. But there was this, I don't know, this, again, I said, as I say, I started to have to defend myself against all sorts of things with that company. And that particular group of people were fairly toxic, and bringing Sondheim out hadn't helped that. I think they felt pretty good about what was going on and their relationship with Stephen and their connection with him. And interestingly enough, I heard some time later that Neil Armfield's production of Sweeney Todd in Chicago, I think, was closed down by Sondheim because I think Neil rewrote a lyric or changed something in it, and he stopped the tour as a result. So he had form, but I think it was after this. So I was left to apologise to the world, which
that must gut you. What does that do to a creative? Your role as the producer, but also as a bloke, to have that company of actors not turn on you, but do that, take that into their own hands, and then being forced to apologise so publicly.
It's an odd betrayal. It's not only betrayal of the hand that's feeding you, but also just a betrayal of the nature of, dare I say it again, showbiz. There's no business like showbiz, and we keep going. We keep those lights on, and we keep that audience entertained, and we make the show happen, even if there is a moment where we're missing a character or missing a song. It's the show goes on, as that's isn't that what we say, what we believe in? Yeah, so it is. I must admit, it took me years and years and years to get over that betrayal, and the humiliation of it. And I've been in many shows, as I said, that we've done similar sorts of things, or the directors had to come in and do stuff to keep it on. And the thought of writing to the composer and saying, let me tell you what they did to your show last night. Well, you could say that about shows that have been performed by terrible performers. I could be writing the composer and saying, you should have seen so-and-so singing your song last night. Appalling. Imagine it.
I think I cut you off before. Did you say you had phoned Cameron?
Yes, I phoned Cameron, and I phoned and John Robertson to try and broker some sort of compromise or something, because one, it was going to cost a fortune to put in full page apologies, ads, like a ad. So as it turned out, I ended up printing. I think it was in the Sydney Morning Herald, a smaller apology to the audience and musicians and to Sondheim and whoever for giving them not the full show on that particular night. Blah blah blah. Yeah. And and then we closed for a couple of nights, sent people away. And then we reopened and sort of limped to the end of the season.
Thanks for revisiting that. I don't prod and pry for any sort of personal pleasure or anything. I just these podcasts are also an historical document, and there's your side of the story as well, of course. So thank you for your candor in sharing that and putting a bit of it on the record for us. It's great.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I think for many of us, it was a quite a fulfilling time, but disappointing, and in the final wash, because a lot of people did believe in it, and dare I say it again, a lot of people did believe in me and were depending upon, as you say, the sort of model to make it work. And I didn't, and it was catastrophic, I think, psychologically and emotionally. And it did take me some years to get through on reflection, the failure, the just owning the fault, owning the problem, owning the way it turned out, and just genuinely taking responsibility, and which I do, because that's the way it is. But it has also it started me on a journey that ended up in deep humility and a deep sense of gratitude to some people in my life that sort of turned it around, and created relationships and opportunities that I would have never dreamed of, that came out of that the bottom of the roller coaster, and it was a very difficult wash afterwards.
It's tough being a pioneer, but that company and what you tried then certainly, I think, sowed the seeds for what has come afterwards. And who knows, that if the timing was a bit different, a couple of other decisions were made, then you could still be here. That's showbiz, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's all in the timing. And I don't have any regrets, and I don't hold any grudges. I'm totally forgiving of any situation. It is what it was, and it is what it is. And my wife still wants to kill, but I'm actually quite reconciled to the situation, and have feel so many good things have come out of the dip. So
yeah. How did you arrive at the name Kookaburra?
Yeah, I expect it because, one, it was Australian. Two, it was they always remind me of laughter and song. So there was that sense. And I thought also there used to be some Kookaburra music. There was a music publishing
label,
company.
yeah.
Label, yeah. So it was all those, a mixture of stuff. And I think I just, where I was living at the time, there were Kookaburras. It seemed like
I think the name is perfect.
Yeah. So that's where that came from. Yeah, it's funny. The more as I think about it, and as you've we've brought it out, and I do sort of see it as a really quite a defining moment in another one, but a one that was a wake up call, I think, for me, in terms of just my own view of the world and journey and view of myself. And I've sort of since then have been on quite a different sort of path in terms of what I believe in, my values, how I deal with other people, myself, situations I'm in, with much deeper humility and gratitude, instead of probably having that pioneering, arrogant chutzpah that you need to sort of, I thought I needed to sort of push it along. So it's good.
Peter Cousens, thank you. This has been the most extraordinary conversation, profiling your triumphant turns in musical theatre, and then finishing off with quite a somber discussion of the troughs that can also be experienced in this fabulous business. So as we started off the conversation, I think we can agree there certainly is no business like show business.
Hear.
Thank you for your candour. Thank you for your passion, and more strength to you as you continue on. Thanks, Pete, very much. And I must say it's been a great pleasure to share with you. It's
it's you are a wonderful listener, and that is a deepened and meaningful skill, because it kind of sets up an engagement that of trust and surrender. So, as they say, well done you.
It has certainly been a joy to feature Peter Cousens in this 3-part conversation for the Stages podcast. His candour, passion and humour have certainly been appreciated in his illustration of the triumphs and troughs of a significant career in the performing arts in Australia. Thanks to Peter also for sharing the musical selections heard throughout our conversations. They come from the 5 albums he has recorded and all available from your good music stores, online and off. My guest over the recent 3 episodes, actor, leading man and producer, Peter Cousens. I know you've been enthralled by this conversation in the same way you are delighted by listening to previous episodes. So why not give the podcast a review and rating? You can do so by scrolling to the bottom of the episode page in the iTunes podcast directory. You've got a choice of 5 stars and an opportunity to leave a brief comment. We'd really appreciate it. It helps the podcast reach a wider listening audience. You can check out all of the episodes featured in the podcast thus far by visiting our website, www.stagespodcast.com.au. I'm Peter Ayres. Keep well, keep warm, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.